I think having a podcast conversation is kind of like going on a scenic train journey, right? And what I mean by that is the first 5 minutes or the first point that I always make on the podcast, I always feels less coherent and less like valuable than like 30 to 40 minutes later down in the conversation. And I think that's why it's difficult to get maybe a listener to like hold on for that journey and get to the point where we really get to like the meat and two veg of the conversation and like, I don't know, explain something really interesting they can apply to their life. When it's like, Joel, go tell me about this, I've kind of struggled to put that in really concrete terms and create a good narrative around it. Just kind of like if you're going on a scenic train journey, you have to go through like all the admin of like leaving the station and like, yeah, getting out of that sort of more industrial area until you get into the countryside and you see the good views. And then it's like when I finish with my point, it's like we pull in at another station and my point ends, right? My passengers get off the train and then your passengers get on that train again at the next station. But you still have to get into your flow a little bit. And we have to leave the station before we reach the countryside again and reach the scenic views. But you have to sort of wait out that time until you get to the really good part. Now, all that is being said because today I'm kind of switching it up and I'm going to start by telling you a story. I'm going to tell you about the Greek myth of Theseus and Pirithous, and then draw three moral messages from it that will maybe branch out into discussion. Now, I came across this story from reading the second chapter of Carl Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul, but it's not like he really went into it too much. He just kind of briefly referenced the myth to like as an analogy for a point he was making. Which is actually one of the three moral messages that I'll come to the end. And I'm going to try and do my best here to tell this story from memory. So, first of all, have you heard of these two characters in Greek mythology?
Not that much, no.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Theseus and Pirithous are two heroes, and they're friends, and they're very good at what they do. They may do some quite immoral things as a sort of today's society is concerned, but anyway, they live in their own context. And when they meet each other, they realize that they both had previous wives that had now passed away. So they were like, why don't we work together and find us some new wives, right? But they're very ambitious, right? Very ambitious men. And they decide that they would like to marry daughters of Zeus, you know, like the main big god bloke in Greek mythology, right? And so Theseus chooses a woman called Helen, who is like the most beautiful woman in Greece and in Athens. And she indirectly caused the Trojan War for whatever reason. I'm not really super like well versed in that story, but I know she was involved in that. Very, very beautiful woman. And they kidnap her, right? They kidnap her successfully and they keep her with Theseus' mother. And Pirithous decides that he wants to marry Persephone. And Persephone is the queen of the underworld. She's the wife of Hades, the god of the underworld. And so they decide to go into the underworld to try and kidnap her, right? So they're traveling through the underworld, getting quite tired because, you know, it's quite rough territory and it's a long way and it's sort of, yeah, the landscape's not very easy to navigate. And they decide to take a rest on some rocks. But after they've rested for a little while and they want to continue on their journey, they realize that they can't stand up because they have been like trapped or tied to the rocks that they're on. They can no longer stand. Like it's almost like they've been, what's the right word? Like, yeah, I guess contained in the rock that they've sat on. And then at this point, these beings called Furies arrive, and these are like the goddesses of the underworld. They're like kind of like imagine a dragon woman, like demon fairy thing. And these are like the what they do is they basically punish mortals when they violate the laws of natural order, right? When they go against the rules of the world, and they punish them. And so what they do is they stretch out these two heroes and torture them, right? And in that moment, in being tortured, all the heroes' courage kind of drains away and they're screaming for help. Now, then Hercules comes along, not for the reason of trying to find these two guys. Hercules was just doing his own business in the underworld, whatever he does. And he finds them both and he saves them, right? He tries to save them. He does successfully save Theseus, right? But he can't save Pirithous. And that's because Pirithous' crime was greater than Theseus's because Pirithous wanted to marry the queen of the underworld and a wife of a god, which was a greater crime against the law of natural order for him to do that as a mortal. And so Pirithous eternally is tortured in hell, basically. So that's the story. Now the three moral messages that I took away from it. One was don't overstep your mark or aim too high, right? Because these heroes, they are formidable in the mortal world at what they do. They're very successful. But Pirithous specifically overstepped his mark by wanting to marry a daughter of Zeus, but wanting to marry the queen of the underworld, a wife of a god. He kind of believed that he could steal the wife of a god. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of ego involved in that. There's a lot of illusions of grandeur, I suppose. And this is what led to his downfall, not only in being willing to go into the underworld and try and do this and fail, but also the fact that his crime was then so big against the laws of the god's world, against the laws of natural order, that he had to remain in the underworld forever and couldn't escape. Secondly, I think there's a message about the danger of resting and believing that you're safe when you're in the unknown or facing a big challenge. So they were in this journey and they thought they were safe enough to rest on these rocks. But then when they went to get going again, they found they were trapped and they were sort of incapacitated, stuck, incarcerated onto these rocks. And I think we can apply that to our lives and go, when we're facing a challenge, we can get to a point where we feel like we're on a good sort of trajectory, where the motion is going really well, and then there's this proclivity to stagnate and be complacent and rest, when we may do that, and then when we go to get back on the wagon again, realize that we're stuck and we can no longer stand up. Kind of like how Casey Neistat said in a video a couple of years ago on YouTube about how life is like walking on those like flat escalator things in airports that like move you along. And he said, it's like going on one of them in reverse. So you have to keep moving to stay in the same place. You have to run to make progress. And if you stop, that thing's just going to reverse you back and back and back down that same corridor. And the final moral lesson that I drew from this is about the symbolism and the significance of the symbolism of the Fury, right? This underworld goddess that will punish you when you breach sort of moral laws and laws of natural order in the universe. And I think they are real things, right? Not in terms of literally, but they manifest instead as the like psychological and spiritual maladies and afflictions that we face when we kind of breach moral codes in life. So they may manifest as extreme guilt. They may manifest as extreme distress and anxiety. They may manifest as depression. They may manifest as overwhelmingness and of not knowing really what your path in life is if you've gone awry. And there's some significance in understanding that when you violate certain rules of life, I guess, you take certain paths in life, there will be punishments, but they may not be like as obvious. They may be psychological, and that's what I think these characters represent. So, tell me what you think of the story, anything from the lessons, anything you drew out, and we can go from there.
Well, firstly, about your train analogy for what having a podcast is like, I love it, and it's why I like kind of like the warm up questions that we do, because I think that allows us and the viewer to answer something somewhat without too much like brain flow state that you require around the 30-minute mark. And I always, I know that Rogan always says that the third hour is normally the best when he does his 3-hour podcast. So I think that just shows like when two people are really passionate, even no matter the length, normally it will end. The end will be the last bit, because you've got all that prerequisite work that you've done to get there to work with. I think about with this myth, I link it. Unfortunately, as well, my Greek mythology isn't massively well versed.
Me neither, man. Me neither.
But I would want it to be. I'll get to that eventually. I think there was another myth that had a similar message, which was about, I think it was also Greek mythology. There was two people that were trying to like form wings, and
it is Icarus.
Yeah, Icarus. That one.
When he no, I'm not super well versed to to this at all, but I feel like it was where he like built wings and felt like he was a superhuman, felt like he wanted to be like one of the gods or was a kind of god, and then he flew too close to the sun and died.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas the other one just kind of flew at the right altitude. Yeah, and I think the lesson with that is I've heard a reference a lot, just like beware the story of Icarus, like how don't get too caught. That's a very similar theme throughout a lot of these stories. Is this kind of death through someone's ego? That's what it is.
Yes,
It,
yes.
because there's also it reminds me of the quite I think it was Aristophanes' very wild theory in the Symposium about how the humans got split up because they tried to become gods, and yeah, they used to be humans used to have double the sort of the organs, the features, the two arms. They had four arms, four legs, two heads, but we got split up because we tried to become gods. And now we have this eternal craving for as a male for the feminine. So I think
Mm,
this is a genuine theme that keeps coming up is death from one's ego. I will. What else do I have? I think there's with the underworld story. To me, the kind of the swampy stones that they're trapped in kind of symbolize the death through complacency as well.
mm,
So Hercules, he's the one that comes and saves them, and there's also stories of him where he's like, on one hand there's the vices, on one hand there's the virtues, and Hercules picks the virtues because if he was to pick the vices, he wouldn't be Hercules. And he's just a character that's not complacent at all. He's the opposite of that. And lastly, I think one of the other, these are kind of like, so far, these are like common kind of spiritual declinations that I'm kind of that appear often. But this is what this story is kind of. This is what I'm thinking about right now, and I think the last one is what we've referenced before. But I think it's a really cool idea about timesing your life by zero, and that's another kind of declination.
yes.
So there's basically just having the big mistakes, and I mean I can tell a little story, but what I mean by timesing your life by zero. So one of the worst situations I've got myself in university was in my first year. It was I think it was like one of the first weeks of first year. I got out the club and I was trying to buy mushrooms, and I ended up a guy promised me a guy in first year promised me that he could get mushrooms. So I hopped in his car. I was very drunk, and we drove off to this place. And he was meeting a friend who was going to going to get it for me. And he asked me to pay him with cash. He was like, "All right, so we only do it in bundles, so it's going to be £50." So I gave him the £50, and he then went to his friend, and his friend said, "No, it needs to be more. We need he only does my guy, and he does it in bundles. It needs to be 200 to get like the amount." And then I realized, shit, I'm being scammed. And he's like trying to get it, but it also seems like somewhat legit. And I'm just chilling in this guy's car, and the guy's trying to like get me to do. He's in the back of the car, snorting lines of coke, and he was like, "Go to an ATM, and get the 200 out." And now I didn't do that. Luckily, I'm smart enough. But let's say if I had done a line of coke with him, Or
Mm,
let's say I had done, got the 200 out, and then he's what demanded more. Um,
mm,
this is very closely gonna. This is one of the things that could have timed my life by zero. Um,
mhm.
because like there's this funny thing. I think it's what's that comedian called that got slapped by Will Smith again? What's he called?
Chris Rock.
Yeah, there's this Chris Rock line where he's like, "Nothing good happens in an ATM past 10 p.m." And it's very true. Think about it. I mean, unless you're going to like a restaurant to get some cash out to the Indian person and he takes cash, why else are you going to an ATM at 10 p.m.? And
Mm,
and as well as is to buy drugs, is to buy something for some vices. That's it. That's it. Nothing. That's a law. Nothing happens good. Nothing good happens past 10 p.m. and an ATM.
mhm,
But yeah, that's what I mean by timesing your life by zero. Getting yourself into such a bad situation that
mhm,
you can't recover from it, or your perception is always altered by that one experience. And that was just a story of when I got very close to that.
mhm. Now, yeah, I like a lot of what you said there. These two messages, right, of death and demise through like over identification with ego, or death and demise through complacency. That isn't that like the majority of cautionary stories. You can look at Frankenstein, right? He has an over identification with his scientific competence, and he builds this monster that he can't control anymore, and it leads to his demise. Or you've got many Shakespeare's plays are around that sort of narrative. When I studied Othello at A level, when it's his ego, it's Othello's overinflated ego that makes him insecure that his wife will be disloyal to him, and so Iago, the evil character, can plant little seeds of lies in his brain until he comes to his own demise, right? And these are the reason they're myths, the reason they're archetypal stories is because they have lessons that are always relevant. Like they're relevant to me and you now in 2025, but I think they'll be relevant in 2125, in 100 years time, or maybe even 1,000 years time, in whatever state the human race is in by then. These lessons will still be relevant, and maybe even more so because we're becoming so powerful as a species, technologically, economically, that the caution of over identification with ego, or the caution of complacency, is going to be more crucial to understand. The fact that we may be at a place where technology and AI is so useful to us that we have no need to think or act for ourselves, or we may get intoxicated by the power that we have over the environment because of how efficient our systems and mechanisms are. These stories are going to be relevant forever, right? So that's addressing that first bit you said. The second bit about this idea of timesing your life by zero makes me think of it's a theme running through Morgan Housel's two books that I've read um, in the Psychology of Money, and I think there was a specific chapter on it in his book Same as Ever, which is the idea that good things in life take a long time and often go in small increments, right? Whereas bad events in life, whether that's on a large scale in terms of the economy or in the environment, or in our personal life, right? Zooming down into our personal life, the negative events happen very quickly. So, like, I don't know, you work hard at your job in a certain company or a certain craft. Those skills are developed over a long period of time. Competence takes patience and consistency and discipline, right? Each day you have to show up and be good at your job and learn the skills and do the hard things and craft and craft and craft until eventually 10, 20 years down the line, you're very competent at what you do. But if you make some terrible, terrible mistake, you, I don't know, you could make such a bad mistake interpersonally in your company that you get fired, or you could mess up one project that means that no one has any trust in you anymore, or you could have a crazy night and have a drug overdose, or fall down into alcohol. These things happen quickly. It can all crash down quickly, and so a lot of being smart in life and having common sense is avoiding these times in your life by zero experiences. You can in the world of relationships, whether that's a romantic relationship or a friendship, you can, that the strength of that relationship builds over time in small little steps of positivity. Each conversation, each sort of gift, each act of service to the other person builds another brick on that tower of that friendship. But one massive fiery argument could crash the whole thing down, and you break up or never talk to that person again. It's this sort of theme in the universe that good things take time from a lot of little steps, and bad things crash down very quickly. He talks in Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel, a lot about this, that, getting wealthy is a lot about your small decisions on a day-to-day basis, small investments here and there, relying on the law of compounding. But you can go and pay for something stupid in one night. You can go to a Las Vegas casino and burn $1 million in one night if you want to. You can throw that all away very quickly, and there's a lot of cautionary tales that tell us this theme, I think.
Yeah, in this I have a couple different branches from the ego sort of being a downfall. Firstly, it's people's ego get in the way of them being successful because they're unwilling to be a fool. It's stopping them from making that step to be seen as a fool and trying something new. Secondly, I think about in relationships where this is like the most popular Peterson clip that I keep seeing is how when people when they're in an argument with their partner, the goal is to win the argument, not necessarily solve the solution, not necessarily solve the issue, and that's just ego, isn't it? And then the third thing is this Hollywood celebrity culture of the ego being their whole world, and it's being like their image being absolutely everything to them, and when that's not enough, they tend to darker and darker and darker things. So it's there's many ways that your ego can kill you.
But the ego has insatiable hunger. Do you know what I mean? The ego is never satisfied. The ego is never full. And also, the dangerous thing about ego is even if it goes well and the ego wins, that's not actually a good outcome. And what I mean by that is the outcome you use in terms of an argument, right? If you're arguing with your husband, say, right, and you have this desire to win, and you do win, right? You do change their mind or persuade them to go your way, then your closest person to you, you've made them into a loser, in inverted commas. That's what Peterson talks about in the clip, right? That you actually, the purpose of having an argument is so you reach a compromise where you're both happy, not so one person wins. Because if one person wins and the other person has to lose, and do you want to be around somebody that you see unconsciously or consciously as a loser? No. And that's why that clip does so well, because there's something quite profound in it.
It's so true, though. I think it's even with immature people around our age, it's people don't like to lose arguments. People will still argue, like people I know. Like it's and it's I think it's something I've generally got better at, because when you are having generally a debate or an argument, it's the thing of not wanting to be wrong, isn't it? So
Yeah.
Well, that was a very cool point. Where did you read that from, the Greek mythology bit?
So it was Jung talking about a
yeah.
stage in therapy where a patient feels cured, right? So they leave the therapeutic situation and they go out into their life, but they're still too fixated on healing themselves. They're still not quite socially adjusted or free of their neuroses. They might feel like they do, but they're still kind of stuck in their own head and have to sort of live life walking on eggshells, or they have this ego fueled belief that they're fixed. But actually it turns out that that's still part of their difficulties psychologically, and they can tend to then crash and what's the right word? Fall back. Is it wow, what's the right word when somebody the word eludes me now, it might come back to me, but when they sort of then return back to difficult, like the neuroses they were in, right? And he used that the idea of when Theseus and Pirithous rest in the underworld as that they think they're fine, so they'll stop working, they'll stop like moving forward, but then they realize that they're stuck where they are, they're still stuck.
So after therapy, people kind of think like that's cool. My issue's fixed now. I've done the time with the
Yeah,
therapist.
that self work done. No more
Mm,
need for self work. Do you know what I mean?
mm, yeah. Okay. Uh, Tell me about the levels of experience. Great point, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. How long do you reckon you've got? Because this is
I've got
reasonably long.
until 11:15. My mum's ETA.
Really excellent. Okay, fantastic. So last week we were talking about we touched on at the end this idea that that experience has levels to it, and you used an example of a speeding ticket where well actually you started with the philosopher Berkeley's idea of like, if a tree falls and nobody sees it or nobody's aware of it, did it happen? And I kind of have an answer to that question, building on, and it kind of builds into this like model, I guess, um, of 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 the difference in, let's say, significance. You've used that word as well in these kind of conversations, the significance of an experience and the difference between, I guess, subjective significance of an experience and its objective existence, which are actually separate. Whereas Berkeley's trying to say they're the same thing, right? So I'll just start with what my notes were here. I think that there are four like levels of experience roughly. There may be some overlap between them, but I think I can roughly like separate things out into four different levels, right? And these levels are kind of the degree of primacy or the degree of significance that the experience has to us subjectively, or let's say the amount of, or how close the information or the event is to your like first-hand experience. So I use an example of New York City, right? If you go to New York City and you walk the streets and you have the full sensory experience of what it's like, you hear the noise of the cars and the people walking on the street, you smell the sort of, I don't know, the food smell coming out of a restaurant, but you also smell maybe the drain, the sewer drain next to you, or you see the large skyscrapers and you sense everything around it, right? You are there firsthand experiencing New York City. You have a firsthand experience of it. And then you can go to the next layer, the layer, let's say, further away from you, and have a secondhand experience of New York City. This might be your best friend or your sibling or something goes there, right? And they tell you what it was like in quite good detail. They tell you about how it smelled, how it felt, what they saw, what they heard. They use great words. They go into great detail in their story, and you kind of get a sense of what it might be like based on experiences you've had that are similar from what they're describing, but it's not as close. It's not as significant as if you had been there yourself and experienced that level. The third level is like a, I don't know, like distant experience. Let's call it that, something like that, where I can Google right now pictures of New York City, right, and I can see what some buildings look like. I can see what the taxis look like there. I can see a couple of restaurants there and what's on the menu at those restaurants. But I'm not there myself, and I'm not getting a sort of secondhand telling of the experience by somebody I know. It's not very descriptive. It's not very rich in information, let's say. And so it's kind of, I have an awareness that there is New York City, a place in America that's quite far from me, that there's a lot of business going on there and there's a lot of corruption, let's say, and there's a lot of wealth and some inequality and whatever. I've never been there. I don't know, but I have an awareness that it's there, similar to the way that you feel about Africa in conversations we've had previously, right? That for you, Africa is on that distant experience level. Then the final level is the non-experience level, where you have no idea that you can even experience that thing. This is where what you don't know resides, right? Which is an area of like knowledge that we don't seem to even think about because we have no conception of it. I don't know what I don't know, right? And this is like if you went to an uncontactable tribe, indigenous tribe that sort of don't have technology and still live like our ancestors from long ago. They don't even have a concept of New York City. And this is where Berkeley's idea of the tree falling and nobody seeing it and being aware of it is. It's in the the non-experienced level, right? It still exists. The tree still fell, but you don't know you didn't know that the tree fell, right? But it still happened. And to sort of finish it, I'll go back to actually say like what does this actually mean, right? What's the practical application of this theory? Why does it matter, Joel? Why should we care that there are different levels of experience? Well, number one, we have to recognize which level of experience some information or some event or some concept is for us, right? So, for example, if you think you know about love from watching, I don't know, some romantic film or reading a book or hearing about your best friend's relationship or what you think you've read about love through poetry or books or whatever, right? You still don't know what it's truly like until you experience it firsthand. It might be very, very detailed from that secondhand perspective, but it's still in the secondhand level of experience. And so you want to bring it into the firsthand at some point in your life to really understand it and know what it's about. And secondly, we must recognize when we are reluctant to bring information from a sort of more distant level of experience to the first. Okay. And this is where your speeding ticket analogy comes in. If you get a speeding ticket letter through the mail, you know it looks angry and you know there's a fine in there, and you neglect it, you're leaving it in the distant experience or like the secondhand experience level when you're not opening it and really confronting it. And then expanding out from things like speeding tickets, like mundane things like that, I think about it in terms of like problems in our relationships or in our life. Sometimes we kind of push things to the side and leave them in a more distant or more secondhand level of experience and don't bring them close into significance and into primacy to really confront them. That can be something like a relationship doesn't quite feel as right as it did. A friendship seems to have shifted a little bit, but no one sort of acknowledges it. Or you've noticed that your personal conduct in life has it's kind of decreased a little bit in quality. You've maybe took your foot off the gas slightly, but you don't want to really think about that. There's just a sort of voice in your head that's keeping that away from being right in front of you and focusing on it. And sometimes that can be dangerous, as what you neglect to experience firsthand doesn't go away. Like it exists. It's just you're less willing to really subjectively experience it. Does that make sense? I've used that word a lot, but this is a difficult thing to try and get across. And I'll finish with a quote that it reminds me of, which is one of Jung's, where he said, "That which you most want to find is where you least want to look." And putting it in the terms I've just laid out with this like levels framework, I think the experience you most need to have in its full primacy and significance has been unconsciously neglected to an inferior level, and thus must be consciously dug up and addressed to organize your psyche appropriately and move your life forward. That's a lot of words, but basically, if there's something you need to confront in your life and you're pushing it away, even though you know it exists, you're just pushing it away to a more distant level of experience, you need to bring it forth and address it. Now, that was quite complicated. So if you have any questions, go, because I'm still getting my head around this myself.
Yeah, firstly with the young point, so basically where you want to look is actually to go to New York itself. You don't want to just read about it. That is where you least want to go, because it's easier to just kind of read about it. And when we say things
Hear
like New
about
York,
things.
this is just like a metaphor, like New York. It's going to a personal kind of state, being the person that you kind of want to be. We can kind of play with this. And so I think Schopenhauer summarizes it perfectly in one quote of, "He who gets his wisdom and knowledge only through books is like those who read about is like those who learn about a place only through travel descriptions." So we know this is to be true, that it's always going to be better in person. And it kind of reminds me of they say at work, like, okay, so the most significant is going to be the most significant form of communication is going to be face to face, then it's going to be on the phone, and then it's going to be on text, and those things can be misinterpreted. And this also made me think of the compression culture idea that we spoke about a couple episodes ago of we're not
Mm,
willing to go to New York. We just want to see a 30-second
mm,
TikTok about New York, and we think we know all about,
mm,
and we can kind of characterize what we think about it. And then we think when we're talking about it to someone else, we're like very misinformed and very ignorant. So my practical implication is actually taking away from this the kind of the levels to experience to the levels of truth and of goodness. And I I got this from started from Peterson basically in a theological context, saying that God is something that's either top down or bottom up. And that's a very he referenced it very always through his Jubilee debates. And that basically means, well, do things do good or do truths? Well, do things stem from truths, or do they all come from a single master truth? And you can replace
mm,
truth with good or with experience or any of these words. What comes from what, essentially? And it's a
mm,
very, very profound question. People take their whole lives to answer that question. But what I read from it, where I read about it from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and he kind of explored this with like, if things were to stem from truths, um, what would that mean? And it would mean that if you kind of think about the way that we live and how we believe in really rigid scientific truths, and then we make assumptions based off that, and how with this idea, every little small thing we do does matter in a way. If we're taking this notion, because then that's how things build up. It's how the butterfly effects. One thing habit will lead to another, and you've got that, and then you've also got the top down approach, which was Plato's idea of basically like, I've got a washing machine tablet here, and somewhere in the universe there is the perfect washing machine tablet. Maybe it turns my clothes into gold. It makes it smell like I'm in a field full of roses. There somewhere exists a perfect washing machine tablet, and that is the ultimate good. And this one right here is just a percentage of that ultimate good. So that's the theory of the forms. And then there's kind of a third category of things are kind of good, but in their own kind of individual ways. And that's like how sight is the function of our eyes, but hearing definitely doesn't mean that hearing isn't as significant, because that's got its own kind of function. It doesn't mean that hearing's bad as
mm,
sight. It just means that hearing has got its own function. If that makes sense. So Aristotle
mhm,
basically played with all three of these ideas, and he was very skeptical, and he didn't actually come to an answer. It is a very, very difficult question. Um, and I mean, myself, I played with this philosophy and I tried to flip it. And I said, well, what about, do things come from one master bad? And, or do you do a bad action and bad things manifest from it? So it is like, so is it the action of punching an old woman that's the bad? Or is it that this is an evil world and we humans are capable of evil and we're capable of jealousy, and that was just a percentage of this total, well, the devil. Um, and so I agree with Aristotle in that it's very context dependent, and it's a combination of all three essentially. Um, I know this wasn't really
mm.
your this kind of wasn't your point, steered away from your point a bit, but something I read recently that is somewhat along the same lines.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because it's very abstract. It's hard to sort of like. I was thinking about this. I want to draw a diagram of this with an example in each one to try and like concretize it as much as possible, because it just sounds like I'm just talking about abstract psychological waffle. But it is true that like I guess there are truths in your life, and there are parts of your life that you have a relationship with, and that differs from person to person. Like how much responsibility you want to take, or how much you want to think about the good or the bad in your life, or how much you want to think about the importance and the meaning in things. You have a relationship to the components of your life that is purely psychological, and how you orchestrate that relationship is very, very, very important. It's like it's not the same for everybody. It's not as simple as, I go out into the world and I see the same world you do, or I experience the world like you do, or I interact with the world like you do. My relationship with the environment, with the things that happen to me, is different, is unique, and that's the same for everybody. And there's something scary in that. There's something confusing in that, but there's also something beautiful in that you can experience life in a completely different way compared to how you used to, or the people around you, by just kind of being present. I guess it comes back to presence. It comes back to psychological peace and being able to notice and pay attention, and be willing, I guess, to confront truths and to confront things as they are. That's isn't that what Nietzsche said? The strength of a mind is. The strength of a mind is measured by the amount of truth it can endure, something like that. It's a complicated thing, man. I think it's a theme that I'll bring up again in later episodes. That's more concretized.
Yeah, and I think your hierarchy. The interesting thing with your analogy is that the top is you don't know what you don't know, and I think there could be some. There is this kind of that to me is the remember the mystery. Is this kind of
Mm,
it's the divinity. There's something that just suggested the divinity to me, and maybe the kind of the top and the bottom are the same thing, and because you don't know what it's like to go to New York, and now you're in New York, and because you didn't know, and now you have this knowledge, that's what all the sensations and that attributes the experience meaning is the
mm,
process of just learning of becoming um non ignorant to that experience. So so maybe to my own kind of example, the top down and the bottom up are the same thing, and it's so what we do to a daily basis are it does matter, and it does come from just our a percentage of our own goodness and our own character. So
mm.
yeah,
It's interesting, isn't it? Classifying information like that, because you've got the things you know, right? I know my name is Joel. I do this. Your name's Jacob. Like, I like these things. I don't like these things. The sort of information that you can very easily bring to mind. Then there's the things you didn't know that you knew. So sometimes I'll put a song on that I haven't heard in years, and I'll know the lyrics to it. I didn't know I knew the lyrics to that. If you told me, Joel, what are the lyrics to this song, I couldn't like tell you them verbatim. But in the sort of context of the song, when that memory cue gets stimulated, then I know the lyrics somehow, but I didn't know that I knew them. And then there's the things you don't know. Like I have no idea about quantum physics, and I have no idea about um I don't know, like I have no idea what certain I don't know. I have no idea about what Dostoevsky really wrote because I never read his books firsthand. I know I don't know that, right? But there are also things you don't know. And they are the things that often kind of swing your life in certain directions. This is another thing from Morgan Housel's work that sort of um, came up in the Psychology of Money and was also in his book Same as Ever, that like the real kind of unexpected stuff actually comes when you think you've accounted for the unexpected stuff. Like it's unexpected because that's what you don't even know you don't know it. You can't, like, when you've tried to make predictions of every single variable that could change or every single possible event that could happen, what's left over, that's what risk is. That's what the unexpected is. And it's always the case. Like, how much of, even in my thinking about my like life so far, how much of the position I'm in now with the things I'm doing, the people I'm around, did I not know even existed? I didn't even know that I didn't know that was going to happen. Like, I had no even conception that I would be in London doing the things I'm doing. And so there is that. There's this mystery element to life because there's so much complexity we're just so unaware of. And I mean, it can shake you to the core if you really think about it. But also there's some beauty in that surprise and that adventure.
Yeah, I think of it like a chessboard, and there's almost an infinite amount of moves you can make just from 64 squares, where each sort of character, each I don't know, what do you call it, piece, where each piece should be. But you get into a situation where you didn't really know this. You're in unknown territory, and you don't know what the other player's going to do to a degree. So you don't know what you don't know, and you lose. And so somewhere along the journey, you made a mistake somewhere, even if it was absolutely tiny. You made a mistake, and that's why I started playing chess again. But yeah.
All right, man. Should we call it a day there with sort of
Yeah,
time constraints and
I
things?
think we'll end it on here. So, as always, thanks for everyone for listening. We're almost at 50 ratings on Spotify, so if we could get that to 50, that would be lovely. So when we get to 100, then it's just going to be easier to get guests on shit. But yeah, thank you for everyone for listening, and until next time.